Resuming debate?
Resuming debate.
Resuming debate.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Resuming Debate. I'm your host, MP Genuis. This will be our last podcast before the Christmas season. We'll take a bit of a longer hiatus, and then we'll be back with new episodes in 2026. It's been a wild dynamic year in Canadian politics, and I'm sure next year will be as well. But for our wrap-up session of the year, I'm very pleased to be joined by my colleague, Aaron Gunn. Definitely my colleague for now, someone who's also openly mused about running for the leadership of the BC Conservatives. So we're going to talk a little federal and provincial politics. Aaron, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me and for saving the best for last.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I figured we should make a point of getting this in, and thank you for doing it. Can you start off by telling a little bit to our audience about your home? You represent a riding covers part of the mainland, I understand, as well as a lot of Vancouver Island. Interesting microclimate there, big kind of conservative breakthrough in the last election. The lines of conflict are a bit different. Some of the issues are a bit different. It's an incredibly beautiful part of the country. Tell us a bit about Vancouver Island and what it's like representing the people of your constituency.
Well, it's a beautiful riding, as you said. There's some incredible people here, North Island-Powell River. So for those that are familiar with the West Coast, that's basically half of Courtenay Comox all the way to the tip of Port Hardy, plus a piece of the mainland, which mainly includes the Powell River and a bunch of smaller islands like Texada, Quadra, and Cortez. It's been a conservative NDP swing riding for quite some time. It was a very strong reform riding, and they went back and forth. We won it in 2004 and 2006, lost it in 2008, won it back in 2011. I think that's right. We one of the 06 or 08 elections, we lost it, and then lost it in 2015 until we won it back here this past April with the most votes in the riding's history. So that was it was good to have some blue back on the North Island and in Powell River.
Yeah, so you hear people say the left coast, but you said it was a strong reform riding. What makes an area kind of conservative NDP, or in the past reform NDP switcher? Is it a kind of populist sentiment, or what's kind of the political culture that makes it distinct and lends to that being the line of conflict?
Well, they really don't like the Liberals. That's one unifying point of ridings like mine. It's got an anti-establishment. Some might call it like a populist bent. There's a feeling, and I think fairly a feeling that's rooted in a certain degree of reality that Ottawa doesn't forgets about coastal BC and Vancouver Island. That Ottawa is very far away, so they tend to. There's a lot of protest votes that happen out here. And that can swing what you might consider left or right. There's also there have been big resource ridings traditionally, so forestry, mining, and so you also get the interesting political dynamics of resource industries, but also historically a high degree of unionization. So that also drove the politics historically. Now that's kind of breaking down a little bit. It's a bit more fluid, but yeah, it's a very unique part of the country, and couldn't be more proud to represent it.
Mm-hmm. And the political dynamics around resources, unionization, that's a particular kind of North Island phenomenon, or are those things that are like what does it mean to be North Island versus Vancouver Island in general?
I would say the better divide would be Victoria and outside of Victoria, as opposed to the North Island being dramatically different than, say, the Mid Island. But Victoria is its own beast, for sure. But outside of Victoria, you have mills, you have forestry, you have commercial fishing, and just as importantly, you have a history of all of these industries playing a major role in the community. Most of the communities on Vancouver Island were built around mills and mines. There's not really any mines left on Vancouver Island per se, And and the forestry jobs, the industry is probably half of what it used to be, and more than 10 mills have now closed on the coast in the past 6 years. So a lot of these industries are getting hollowed out, which drives frustration, and it's one of the reasons why I think they were looking for a change here in the last election.
Yeah. As a side note, tell us what your typical commute is coming from a place so far away. Those of us near cities in Alberta think ours is quite a hike, but you've got a lot longer to go, I think.
Well, I can tell you what my commute's like if I get lucky. If I get lucky,
Yeah, okay.
It's a 45-minute drive to the Comox Airport. You get there an hour before. You hop over to Vancouver. You might have anywhere from a 90-minute to 4-hour layover, and then you're able, if you're lucky, to hop on a direct flight from there to Ottawa. If you're unlucky, you're connecting through Toronto. And if you're really unlucky, like I was 2 weeks ago, when you fly back, you can't land because of fog, and you end up circling over the airport for 45 minutes and returning to Vancouver and getting stuck there overnight. Okay. So it's the commute length can vary, but yeah, if you're lucky, it maybe is 8-9 hours door to door.
Okay. So you got the Comox Airport, so it works out if it works, but I guess there's a few potential hitches along the way. So, okay, that's a great kind of background. And I would say to people anywhere in the country, if you haven't had a chance to visit Vancouver Island, it's certainly worth it. I remember Andrew Scheer, when he was leader, he had this line, Canada, people didn't come here because of the weather. But then when he was in Vancouver Island, he said, well, maybe this is the exception, right?
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about provincial politics. So you're someone who's been engaged with provincial and federal politics over the years. Obviously, there's a lot of similar kinds of issues that come up, although the administrative responsibilities are different. The BC Conservatives have had some churn, some internal conflict, it seems. I'm not super tuned into it, but I'd love for you to be able to share a bit with our audience about kind of the process you're going through, thinking about what role you might play in provincial politics versus the current role you have as a federal MP.
Yeah, I mean, provincial politics in a decentralized federation like we have are very important. The provincial NDP, which have been in power since 2017 here in British Columbia, have been an absolute disaster. I think without question, they're the worst provincial government in the country right now, and probably one of the worst in BC and by extension Canada's history. That's everything from doubling the national debt to this decriminalization of hard drugs that they did in conjunction with the Liberals, the handing out, flooding the streets with opioids, what they like to call safe supply, the crippling of our forestry sector, which, as I pointed out, has lost thousands of jobs since they come in. And these are all features of NDP policy, not bugs, not unintended consequences. They've closed off huge areas from forestry. They've made it prohibitively expensive to extract resources here. And then most recently, you have this Cowichan ruling, which is basically thrown private property rights up in the air, and where you had a judge, a BC Supreme Court judge, basically rule that Indigenous or Aboriginal rights and title are above private property rights, and that has the potential to throw our entire economy into disarray. But again, that is also the direct result of provincial government policy like DRIPA and other things. Even that particular court case, they chose as a provincial government not to argue and to make certain cases against that ruling, just to go along with their ideology. And I always say it's a result of, and we saw this exactly the same with the Trudeau Liberals. Like Justin Trudeau got along really well with the NDP and David Eby, and maybe Mark Carney, it's a bit too early to say, but it was all about ideology over common sense. Mm-hmm. And then there's this whole thing that I know it frustrates me, myself, and yourself as well, where the Liberals play this game of being the arsonist and the firefighter. And when they start backtracking on policies, and then I've even seen the Liberals in the House of Commons celebrating that they got rid of the carbon tax when it was they were the ones that brought in the carbon tax, and they were the ones that demonized everybody who opposed it as not caring about the environment. So there's a lot of that in BC as well, and so it's I think it's important to have common sense conservatives on every level of government, including municipal, by the way, which we don't do enough of.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So basically, you're looking at big challenges provincially and federally. It sounds like in your description, you see a real kinship between the EB government and the Trudeau Carney government in terms of their approaches to things. So how do you decide, I guess, between service in those two critically important fields? I guess you got to make a decision at some point about which one you're going to lean into, but sounds like you see them as in a way very similar areas of service, challenging governments that have been ideological, that have ignored common sense, and that have left behind the people you represent.
Yeah, so it's a very difficult, it's a very tough decision. I know we've talked about it. I've talked with probably 36 of our colleague other MPs in Ottawa, and now people here back in the riding. To me, it fundamentally comes down to, because it would not be, I mean, some people are saying it's an opportunity for me, but it's also a big personal sacrifice, as I'm sure you can imagine, stepping away from a seat as a member of parliament who was recently elected. But to me, it's about where can I do the most good for the people of my riding, the province, and our country. And I feel like I'm doing good and helping to advance arguments and stand up to this Liberal government in Ottawa. But there's also a huge void in British Columbia, and the NDP has wreaked huge amounts of havoc here over the past 8 years. And I believe there's an opportunity. I've also been watching to see who else might step up, but so far I just feel like I haven't seen somebody who can, first of all, will keep the party conservative, which is a concern. Number two, unite conservatives so we don't divide and splinter. And number three, prosecute the case against the NDP government and defeat them in a general election. So to me, that's what I think are the three most important components. And it's a decision that's weighing heavily on me, just because it's have tremendous personal implications for myself, and obviously ripple effects throughout Canada's political system.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we wish you well in that important discernment. Let's dive into some of the issues that you mentioned that are national issues and also BC issues. Pipelines. So there's been a lot of discussion of pipelines, and the BC Premier inserting himself into that conversation, and this sort of pretense that the BC government has a veto when constitutionally it shouldn't. The construction of a pipeline is a matter within federal jurisdiction. What do everyday folks in British Columbia think about the MOU, the possibility of a pipeline, energy development in general? Is the BC government generally reflecting what British Columbians think, or not really?
No, I mean the BC NDP is trying to not get torn apart. They're scared about the Green Party on their left. They're trying to play both sides of the fence on this. Look, the majority of British Columbians, like the majority of all Canadians, strongly support a pipeline to the coast so that we can get top value, top dollar for our most important national commodity and export, so that we can help end the U.S. monopoly on Canadian oil, and that we can make sure that as long as the world needs and demands this product, as much of it as possible should come not from Saudi Arabia or Russia or Iran, but from right here in Canada, supporting Canadian jobs, Canadian workers, and Canadian paychecks. Now, what they are going to try to do, I think the Carney government is doing this, and the NDP will do it here, is they will say yes to a hypothetical pipeline, a perfect pipeline that could exist in some version of the multiverse. And then what they will do is every pipeline that is proposed is they will find some reason to oppose it. And we see this happening right now with something called the Hecate Strait, which is a body of water off the coast of northwestern BC, which is the most economical and likely terminus for a pipeline, where the Coastal GasLink pipeline terminates in Kitimat, and you could terminate it in Kitimat or Prince Rupert or somewhere around there. But now the Greens, Elizabeth May had this video where she just had this whiteboard, and she was making this body of water seem like it's the Bermuda Triangle, and it's so dangerous, and no oil tanker could go through there, and it's going to be an environmental catastrophe. And she's effective at communicating this, and I'm so eager to get in this debate because it is a lie. It is a lie being pushed by foreign funded environmental groups, and I hate it when these groups use disingenuous arguments. I don't even think they believe it. I believe that they believe that Canadian oil needs to stay in the ground, and that is their ultimate objective. But this farce that this body of water can't be transited. I mean, this body of water is Prince Rupert is Canada's third biggest terminal for cargo ships, delivering all sorts of good wheat, I think coal, like other products coming from Saskatchewan, potash. And so there's huge ships going through here every single day. There's two LNG terminals, huge LNG ships going through there every day. This body of water is so dangerous, the Greens and the NDP want you to believe, that Disney cruise liners go up every single day carrying thousands of people. So I think, I don't know, they have you believe that we're putting thousands of tourists' lives at risk. No, it's we're living in 2025. There's all sorts of technologies. There's no hurricane sneaking up on you on the West Coast. You've got professional pilots that are trained to bring the tankers in by tugboat. And it's actually one of the first documentaries I did. So they're trying to spread misinformation. They're doing it because they want to keep Canadian oil and Canadian resources in the ground. And I just wish that they would say that so we can have the fight about what the actual issue is, instead of creating this fake issue of tanker traffic. And I mean, the irony, of course, is that they canceled Northern Gateway and they built Trans Mountain, which terminates in Vancouver, which I'm supportive of. But I mean, terminating a giant pipeline in Vancouver, there's actually much more shipping traffic and everything going in and around the port of Vancouver that poses potential risks than. I mean, northern BC is perfect. It's the shortest distance to Asia. There's very little maritime traffic up there that could cause issues. It gives us a competitive advantage. The pipeline route is shorter from where the oil is actually coming from in northern Alberta and the gas. So yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I don't know if you saw this, Daniel Smith just proposed that they're now looking at an export terminal in Washington State or Oregon. Did you see this going through the Pacific coast of the U.S.?
Okay.
And I can't fault Alberta for trying to find a way to get its oil to international markets. But I mean, that's how big of a joke it's become in this country. We can't even build a pipeline and an export terminal in our own country through the shortest distance, and we're going to do it through the United States instead. Yeah,
I mean, we should be seizing the opportunities we can. It's great to hear you make that strong case. I know you're very pro energy development. Our whole conservative BC caucus is, and yet we've got this dynamic sometimes with the media where you kind of have the elevation of anti-development voices, which leads people in other parts of the country to think that the opposition to development is stronger than it is. So I can see the the importance of the case you're making and of having leaders at both levels of government that can make that case, because I mean, man, speaking as an Albertan, like it would be so wonderful to have strong leadership at the provincial level in BC that is committed to our shared prosperity and to pushing back against the misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about drug decriminalization. I mean, the Trudeau-Eby collaboration that turned BC into kind of this experiment of policy that wasn't implemented nationally, but it was based on exceptional treatment, which had, I think, disastrous consequences. And now it's interesting to see the NDP seem to try to reposition themselves on this. And you did a bunch of work on this issue prior to getting elected. Tell us a bit about kind of the trajectory of that debate and what you think of the NDP positioning on that now.
So, I mean, the NDP, like the Liberals, are backpedaling on almost every aspect of their drug policy, not because I think they've ideologically awoken to reality, but because the polls have and public opinion has hit them in the face. Decriminalization has been just a horrible experiment gone wrong. They partially repealed it. It's still in place, though. It's just that they recriminalized it in public. The opioid epidemic in general over the past 10 years of Liberals and NDP has left a scar on this country that will take generations to heal. 50,000 Canadians dead. That's more than who died in all of World War II. Those are predominantly young Canadians, young men in particular, who had their entire lives in front of them that have been cut short. That leaves cascading tragedy and trauma through families that mothers that lost sons, brothers that lost sisters. It's a horrible human tragedy, and BC is disproportionately affected. Over 15,000 of those deaths, the highest per capita in the country by far, have happened in British Columbia. And what's happened is you used to have this downtown east side where you had homelessness and drug use for many years. And what happened is that downtown east side is not only now 10 times bigger than it ever was before, but there is now a mini downtown east side in pretty much every, even small British Columbia city. Nanaimo, Courtenay, Campbell River, Victoria, Kelowna, all of Prince George. Even the town of Port Hardy that I represent, that's got around 4,000 people, has a little town of 4,000 people that's quite remote, has a huge issue with alcohol and drugs and homelessness. And so it's all part of an ideology where they thought it would be a good idea to destigmatize these substances, to make it safer to use them, bring it out into the open. And instead, what we ended up doing is enabled and perpetuated what is such a self-destructive addiction, instead of doing what we should be doing. And I know that me and you both advocate for, which is instead using that money to get people into treatment, to get them into recovery, and to return them to being healthy members of our country again.
Yeah, it's just been brutal, and for our regular listeners, they may recall I did a episode with my brother. A couple of my brothers are emergency doctors in Vancouver, so they are on the front lines of this in a different way. And some of the advocacy that you've seen in BC has just been so radical on this issue, a real kind of normalization of this, to say, well, this is, you shouldn't this language like, just people who use substances, rather than recognizing that, I mean, we must have compassion for those that are caught in addiction, but we can stigmatize the substance itself without stigmatizing the individuals who are in this situation, and people have to know the risks, the harm associated with these substances, rather than allow the substances themselves to be sort of casually normalized. But it's really been striking to me seeing the what some of these advocacy groups have said. So NDP hit by public opinion, right? Partial rolling back. Do you think there's been some real reckoning with the problems? Are the same people kind of just waiting around to push it further again once the public attention or attitude shifts? I mean, where do you think the debate is going to be going over the next few years?
Yeah, I think if you look at the NDP activists, I don't think they've changed their opinions on, you need to give people a safe supply of drugs, which is actually deadly and very addictive opioids, is what they mean by that when they're talking about hydromorphone or Dilaudid. So I don't see, I think there's a bunch of activists at their core. I find a lot of the insane left-wing policies, you can track back, if you look closely, to a very to a premise that is very ideological in nature, and that they make a bunch of logical inferences from. So in this case, I think their premise is that every Canadian or every person, it is, and they've said this, it should be a human right to basically put whatever they want in their body, including drugs. And that's a human right. And denying that is an infringement of their human right to do drugs. And if you have that premise, if you buy into that, then all of their policies make sense. And of course, what it ignores is the fact that so many of these substances have huge consequences felt not only to the individual using them, which would be one argument, but to society at large, to their families, and even also kind of, it's almost like selling yourself into slavery or something, because at a certain point you lose the ability to make good decisions, make rational decisions for yourself, and to not continue to use those substances once you get caught in the throes of addiction to something like crack cocaine, crystal meth, or fentanyl.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing on that, and thanks for all the work you've done on that one over the years. So we've talked about energy development, we've talked about drugs. These are two issues that a national audience will be familiar with the conversations on. Let me throw one other issue at you that I know is important to you, but will be foreign to many people listening, and that's the fishery. You're very involved in debates around the fishery. But the fish conversation is probably Greek to a lot of people who live kind of between where I am and the middle of the country. So just give us the Coles notes on the fishery. What's important? What's controversial in the fishery? And what are the policy issues you're working on in that regard?
Well, there's no issue that takes up more of my time than fisheries. I'm on the Fisheries Committee, a standing committee for fisheries and oceans. Yeah. And, there's, I think in the West Coast, and there's a whole nother fishery on the East Coast. There's about 26 different fisheries. Think of prawns, gooey duck, salmon, halibut, etc. The list goes on. And then you have different seasons, different zones, all of these different things. So so first of all, you got to think of user groups. So there's sports fishing or recreational fishing. There's commercial fishing, and then there's also First Nations, like FSC, which is food, social, and ceremonial, I think, which is like their allotment that I think goes back to treaties or the Constitution or something like that. And it's a little bit of gray area of how much that should be. And so you have the different user groups. Those user groups are competing with each other for access and for quota. Different fisheries are managed differently. Something like halibut is decided between the United States. It goes back over 100 years, International Halibut Commission, and then you have a set quota and you own a percentage of that quota. And other fisheries like prawns are shotgun fisheries. So the fishery will open on like May 15th, and then everyone goes out and tries to catch as many prawns as they're allowed by how many traps they're allowed until there's something called the spawner index, where it's like the amount of eggs or females or something, and then DFO closes it. So there's a whole bunch of different rules around that. And then there's also something called aquaculture, which can be quite controversial here, which is basically farmed fish that I find most people in the prairies in Ontario don't actually have a great didn't even know it's such a controversial issue. But in BC, it can be quite controversial for various reasons. But so those are the different facets. I'll tell you what the big issues are. The big issues are, the biggest issue is basically environmental groups pushing different ideological policies on the department that has led them to move away from hard science-based conservation to ideological mass closure. So there's something called 30 by 30. This is a UN agreement where countries promise to basically close 30% of their water and land to various economic activities by 2030. And what that's meant for the fisheries is huge closures, the potential for huge more closures. They're following massively disproportionate in British Columbia because the Liberals have no seats out here on the coast. And Atlantic Canada, you have a bunch of Liberal MPs that represent fishing communities, and they're pushing back on this. So then it all is falling on BC's coast, and has the potential to cripple this entire industry. And I've tried on committee pushing it back. I can't even imagine this, Garnet. They pushed forward this giant plan to close these huge areas, and I asked DFO to their face, and I asked the minister to their face, and they did no socioeconomic analysis at all of what these closures would cost. And I asked them, like, does it matter how many jobs it will cost? Or are you ideologically committed to doing this no matter what? And of course, they had the argument of, we can have our cake and eat it too, which of course is not the governing is about making choices and trade-offs. And the thing about these closures is they're so ideological. I call them underwater parks. The fish, they swim in between, like through areas. So you're not closing it. You're not going to preserve any. All you're going to do is you're going to concentrate the same size fleet into a smaller and smaller area. They're going to be in less efficient areas to catch them, so they're going to be out on the sea longer, which isn't good for the environment. You're going to in areas where you're going to find more bycatch, which means catching fish that you weren't supposed to be or trying to catch, and aren't allowed to keep in some cases. And again, it's this ideological imposition from a transnational organization that ignores the fact that we had a different way of doing things here in Canada. We had, spawner index management for prawns, among the best in the world. We have, with the United States, a way of managing the halibut population as it existed, that to manage numbers, to make sure it was sustainable, to make sure we were conserving these areas. These giant area closures have not proven effective in anywhere that they've been tried in the Western world, and it's just all driven by this. I feel like there's certain groups that aren't going to rest until the entire country is turned into a massive park, whether that's on land. And by the way, the land portion of this will have big consequences potentially for mining, forestry, and other industries as well. But it seems like it's really hit the fisheries first.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. That's really interesting. That's a very good explanation of the divide on that issue. Aaron, you've got a tight schedule, I know, so I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question, then we'll wrap up. And any final words you want to say, pile them in at the end here. Appreciate your time, and you've got a lot on your plate at the moment. You've talked a lot about common sense versus ideology. And it's clear listening to you on all these different issues that the idea of common sense versus the kind of radical left-wing ideology that you're seeing is really important. Maybe so as a final note, if you could just tell us a bit about kind of what common sense is, what it means to you. How does how does the development of common sense occur? What's kind of the intellectual roots of that concept of common sense that you draw on?
Well, the easiest way to describe it to me is it's the antithesis to ideology. So it is evidence driven. It is pragmatic. If we take a look at historically, it's about if we have a set of policies in place as a society or way of doing things that has been there for 50 years or 200 years or 1,000 years, getting rid of it without a very good explanation, I think, is ideological as opposed to common sense, because usually if something's worked for a long period of time, there's a reason why. Maybe you don't understand the reason why, but there's a reason why. I think common sense elevates logical arguments over emotional arguments. We've seen this on some of the gender craziness that we've seen. I mean, there's so many issues. That one just popped into my head. I mean, like it's the push for biological males who are convicted of sexual offenses to be allowed to be put into female penitentiaries, which is what the Liberal government allowed, as you well know. I mean, that I can't think of a better example of something more solely ideological that is so clearly not common sense. And there's so many different iterations of that, and it reminds me of like you've had governments federally and provincially that's almost like they're following this kind of fake woke religion, and they have a piece of paper and it says, well, this if I do this, it's the right thing, which means I have to do this in this situation, without actually thinking through what they're actually doing, looking at the evidence, being pragmatic, and for inspiration, looking not into some crazy new sermons from university professors in Victoria, Toronto, and Vancouver, but looking back historically at the policies that have worked and have helped shape the most successful civilization and society in the history of the world. And I think that the move away from that, I'm very confident the pendulum's coming back. And so and what I do think though is that as people are waking up to this, it's up to us as elected leaders, as spokespeople on these issues, to be pointing out the failings of the ideological policies, and B, proposing the common sense solutions, usually are not some brand new innovative thing, but taken from our past of policies that have worked successfully for decades previously.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great description of a very coherent worldview that is commonsensical and also draws on that conservative tradition, right, of learning from our past and of not upturning things that have worked for a long time just because someone wants to experiment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, Aaron, thanks so much for the conversation. I know we could keep going for a long time. You've been very generous with your time, and you've got a lot to do. So, thanks for listening, everyone. Merry Christmas. We'll be back with new episodes in the new year. And if you live in BC, reach out to Aaron. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you and pick up on some of these conversations. Merry Christmas.